All righty, ladies and gentlemen, it is Wednesday, June 21st at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. And, of course, that means in the world of enterprise technology, it's time for Hot Technologies. Yes, indeed. My name is Eric Kavanagh. I will be your host and moderator for today's event. The hot topic, folks, it's a big one on Marche, enabling the mobile workforce. And I did not intentionally grab the tagline from Mr. Macron's candidacy in France. It was quite coincidental, I promise you, but it's still rather exciting. So we're going to talk all about the mobile workforce and how you can make sure those folks get what they need and can do what they do well. A lot of challenges, a lot of issues out there. We will archive this webcast for later viewing, so if you missed something, you can come back and check it out. Also share it with your friends and colleagues, and I should say, do not be shy. The best way to get really custom content and the information you need from an event like this is to ask questions. So you can ask a question from the chat window or from the Q&A component of your webcast console. Anytime during the event, send it on, and I will be sure to grab that and weave it into the Q&A at the end. We're going to have a couple presentations, and then we'll hear from Bill Ellis of IDERA Software. Of course, our own Robin Bloor is on the line today. And with that, let's dive right in. So I've got some good stats from RCR Wireless about what's going on, and really it's pretty mind-blowing. They say the global mobile workforce will hit 1.87 billion people by 2022. That's over 40% of the overall workforce on the planet. So if you think about that, now all of a sudden where you used to have, in terms of IT capabilities, in terms of functionality on devices like computers, where you used to have 99% or more of that on premises in your offices. That was even, let's say, 15 years ago. 10 years ago, it was probably 85 to 90%. 5 years ago, it was like 70%, something like that. Now it's all the way down almost to 60%. And this is a big deal. So we've seen this massive shift in terms of the technology, the actual tools that people use, move outside the office into the workforce. Well, there are countless benefits to this. I mean, literally, if you look at the shipping industry, for example, like UPS, or if you look at guys who go out to the rigs and oil fields, if you look at any of the various jobs where it helps to have deep functionality with you on the road, the mobile workforce is changing everything. Now, one of the problems, and we'll talk about this in some greater depth, is that we have a couple different things going on, one of which is diversity of workforce. So in 2020, I just saw the stat today, there are going to be 5 generations of people in the workforce. That means you're going to have grandma and grandpa and then mom and dad and also the kids, but theoretically you're going to have essentially great-grandpa and great-great-grandpa and great-great-grandma out there. Now, obviously it's not within a particular family, but the point is, generational-wise, you've got 5 different categories of broad individuals in the workforce. Each of them has their own tendencies, their own predilections, their own propensity to work with technology. Obviously, kids tend to be mobile first in terms of how they interact with the world. And to think about the communication channels that have changed. We talked about this on another show recently. Snapchat is how a lot of teenagers communicate. They don't really even want to talk to you on the phone. They just want to send a little Snapchat messages back and forth. Well, that's just one example in the consumer world of how things are changing, and that can be spread out over the entire spectrum of technologies, of functionality, of individual, of company, of business model. It's just all over the map. But the point is that the mobile workforce is real, it's out there, and unless your company has a solid program for understanding how that affects your business processes, and I'm talking very specific technology-driven, data-fueled processes, if you don't understand what those are and are not managing that from an IT infrastructure and a process and a governance perspective, you're going to have all kinds of problems. So there's the iPhone. I remember when that sucker came out. It seems like a million years ago now, but it was only like, what, 2007 or 8? It was not that long ago that we didn't have iPhones. And, of course, the form factor just fundamentally changed technology and really enabled the mobile workforce. And I recall at the time, of course, the iPad came out and then the iPhone, and right around the same time. I can't remember which was first, but the iPad was really one of the most significant forces of change for enterprise IT possibly since the mainframe. And the reason is because, frankly, a lot of very senior executives, C-suite people at large organizations, loved it right out of the bat and said, I want it, I'm bringing it to work. Well, think about that. All of a sudden, IT had to turn around and deal with a problem that they probably didn't want to deal with, which was deal with all these new devices. So now, if you have iPads, well, how do you weave that into the matrix? How do you maintain governance over that? These are all really big challenges, and that iPad and the iPhone really was a hugely disruptive force in IT and IT management for organizations large and small. But we still have this spectrum of challenges and benefits that ranges across about as broad an array as you can imagine with mobile devices, and of course they keep changing, right? So now it's not only BYOD, it's BYOA a lot of times where executives and professionals are bringing their own device. Well, we used to call that shadow IT, right? For those of you in that older generation, you may remember the old radio shows. They had radio drama, and one of them was The Shadow. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows. And I remember that stuff as a kid. Well, shadow IT is freaking everywhere these days. Everyone's doing shadow IT. So this is a real challenge for the IT management and business process management, all the operations people. You want to be able to leverage mobile devices, but you want to be able to tie that back to your systems. And there are lots of weird little issues that come into play, not the least of which is the visual experience and the associated functionality that you get when you use a mobile device. And any of you who have used multiple devices like an iPad versus a laptop versus a desktop versus, you know, some of the newer mobile smartphones that are coming out have experienced the fact that the functionality doesn't work quite right. And this is a real problem. In fact, the browser wars should have prepared us for this because the browsers all view things slightly differently as well. And that's another big challenge for not just design, not just the look and feel and the sleek nature of the application you're using, but the actual functionality. How do you get the drop-down menu to select what you want on that device? That's a big deal. So that's what we're going to talk about a bit today, and we're going to hear from Robin and then from Bill Ellis, as I mentioned, who's a real expert in the field. So this is one of the big issues that people have. It's just the darn variety. And there's no single method for being able to work across platforms. You got Samsung and Apple mostly making these things, but there are so many devices. I saw recently that the iPhone was winning in terms of sales, and I was shocked at how low the number was. It was like, I don't think it was even 20%, and they were number one, which means there are literally scores, if not hundreds, of devices out there that can be used. Well, you could just imagine how the IT department feels about that. And of course, that range of technologies is changing. It's getting more diverse by the day. Everything is changing. We've got all kind of stuff happening. Containers, you know, just to throw another wrench in the works here. And then, of course, we have the diversity of the workforce. A lot of millennials, they're just a lot different in terms of their preferences, how they use technology, what they're willing to wade through, how quickly they can figure stuff out. Typically, it's faster than with us old-timers, but nonetheless, all of that has to be mapped back to your on-prem systems or at least up to the cloud, and that's a big, big challenge. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to the inimitable Dr. Robin Bloor. Robin, take it away.
Okay, thanks for that brief introduction. Let's talk about mobile. It wasn't particularly obvious. You know, Eric's referred to the introduction of the iPhone. It wasn't particularly obvious when the iPhone came in exactly what this heralded. I think it became obvious when the iPad entered in that we were actually going to have a fairly diverse mobile world. I'm a kind of Apple bigot, really, so I don't really think in terms of Android. But of course, although Apple makes, you know, the majority by a long way the major profit from both the pad market and from the phone market, it doesn't have the numbers anymore, which is kind of an interesting thing. And that means that there'll be, apart from anything else, there's going to be new devices. People are going to take them up and they're going to sell in the millions. So it creates a very diverse environment that you may need to go through. the joke here of I'd ask Siri where the hell we are if I could but get a signal. The thing that makes mobile devices slightly different is that, you know, desktops are connected all the time, and mobile devices are not necessarily connected, and they're not necessarily 24/7 on, you know, because people can turn them off, but also you can get onto airplanes and things like that, and therefore it's a different kind of device than anything we ever had before. I would maintain that the mobile phone is actually the real personal computer because it's the one that you have with you all the time. It's the defining human mobile device. The tablets are slightly different. It's a kind of weird situation when you kind of think about it, that in one way or another there's more than one functional kind of mobile device. Anyway, what it means to be mobile. The internet changed. We didn't kind of notice it happening, or I didn't notice it happening, but nowadays 80% of internet activity is from mobile devices. And that's an extraordinary figure when you think about it. And 47% of that 80% is tablet traffic. It's possible to provide most applications in the mobile setting. In other words, if you've got applications that already exist and you know, they're accessible on the desktop, you can probably put them on a mobile phone, but there is obviously limiting factors. Form factor and keyboard are one of them. Tablets themselves are, according to Microsoft and Apple both, gradually going to replace mobile PCs. And they have particular applications in certain areas because they're more rugged. One of the things that I remember talking to healthcare IT people about was the fact that before the tablet existed, if you went into an environment that was an isolation ward, you know, you would have to have the devices that you took in with you would actually have to be disinfected in some way or other. It's really easy to do that with a tablet. It's not at all easy to do that with what they used to have, which was mobile phones on desktops that were mobile by virtue of being on trolley and plugged in an environment. They used to have to kind of stay in those environments or go through an extraordinary kind of disinfection being taken out of those environments. And we don't kind of think much about those environments unless we work in those environments. But the tablets and the mobile phones have made working in those environments really, you know, quite natural to be connected and work in those environments. And when the stat that Eric put up, 1.7 billion, I think it was, mobile workers by 2020. Am I a mobile worker? I mean, I kind of think like that. I am a mobile worker in the sense that occasionally I'm working outside the office, and when I do that, I'll be working on a tablet or doing stuff on a mobile phone. So when you actually look at that and you think about that, it's probably that's an account of people that will only be using mobile devices for their workforce. So, you know, people that are actually fundamentally moving around. Anyway, we can think now in terms of three kinds of user: desktop users, tablet users, and phone users, and they need different applications, and that's the reason for mentioning it. Camera and voice are now an inherent part of mobile devices, but they're also an inherent part of desktops, you know. But they're used in different ways on mobile devices, and they have different interfaces on mobile devices. And, you know, the whole character of why you're using that is different on a mobile device. So it's, you know, if you're building mobile applications, you are not building the kind of applications you used to build for a whole host of reasons, a lot of which were on that slide. So if you were a business that already, in one way or another, was building applications that ran on websites, the question is, should they be mobile applications as well? And this slide kind of looks at that. You know, a web application, you can do more on it simply because they're built in one way or another. They're built without actually caring about the form factor. So people will build a web page which you can't reasonably use or you can't easily use on an iPhone or an Android device, which might just be usable on a tablet, but even on a tablet might not be particularly good. Normally it would be okay. Or you can build a mobile app. If you build mobile apps, then there's an application glut on the various download stores. And that kind of drives download resistance. I mean, if you look at my particular iPhone, it's just packed full of applications that I can't seem to get rid of. I delete them, but they always seem to get downloaded again in some strange way. I obviously don't know how to manage an iPhone properly. But, you know, you end up with just a glut of applications, and it doesn't make any sense. I suspect I've got more applications on my iPhone than I've got on my desktop, which is bizarre when you think about it. Mobile apps are a litmus test for success. It's kind of interesting that some web businesses, Yelp is one of them, did extremely well by creating an app and having people download it. And it seems that the areas where there was reasonably good success were actually in the financial sector. That's banks, but also, you know, E-Trade and companies like that, because people like to be able to trade stock on the move at times. Food applications, so not just looking for restaurants, but also, you know, making recipe sites. You know, they did really, really well in terms of apps. And a lot of people didn't do particularly well at all. And that's the reason, I think, mostly, is that there's only so many apps that you ever get used to using. And if you're only using an app once every few days or so, then you forget about it. If it doesn't have a big personal value to you, you kind of forget about it. So it's difficult to create a mobile app that's successful in the general sense, but obviously you can create them for your own staff and use them within the organization. Mobile apps have really big development costs, and it's a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons for that is that you're actually pointing at a distinctly different number of devices. And you can get development environments that will target multiple devices, but some applications, especially when you're looking at security, really you have to do coding for the device itself. You would write different code for the iPhone or the Android environment, and maybe different. And, you know, sometimes you're referencing hardware capabilities. So, you know, the general mobile app, yeah, maybe there's development software out there that you can build one that's kind of hybrid and will straddle most of the target environments. HTML5 makes that much more possible than ever was before. But, you know, you also get a situation where some apps actually you can't do that. That means that you're actually doing the same work multiple times for each device that you're targeting. And that's not going to stop people claiming that they have a right to bring their own device. You know, it's just not going to make any difference to that. So you can't really get around it. Apparently, analysis of mobile apps indicates that they drive more sales, right? And this is it's a strange kind of contradiction. I was saying the website and the mobile app as if you like complements. The apps drive more sales. The websites are better at picking up new customers. Apps are better at retaining customers you've already picked up. Customers spend an awful lot more on websites than they do on apps, but customers spend more often on apps. And that's it's a really weird thing, you know. And that speaks to the fact that if you're going to build something, then you probably need a website incarnation and a mobile app incarnation if you're expecting it to be widely used. And that is, in one way or another, that's kind of a dramatic expense to add to a software project, which in any case might be doing quite a lot of other stuff. As a general idea, a website's a catalog and an app is a loyalty machine. Mobile app development, and this is just to kind of break the problem down. Different development environment, different problems in terms of hardware, different user interface design principles, an ability. You're going to have offline capability because a lot of apps, people expect to be able to use them on if they're disconnected. They don't want to lose the data. Some of the data's got to be stored locally. So you're building a different app than you might build, let's say, for the desktop. And then you've got the mobile back-end issue. There's going to need to be middleware there. There's going to need to be security procedures there. Quite likely there's going to be a service-oriented architecture in the background where you're knitting together various things. And what this is saying is you don't just take some team that's used to developing applications on the server and start throwing them at mobile. You really need mobile developers and people with mobile experience. Anyway, having said that, just one more thing to say. Above all, mobile apps are, in most cases, a customer touch point. So they've got to be really good because, the customer will judge the company on the basis of the mobile experience, or it will be a factor in their judgment. And in some cases, as I mentioned, the mobile app is actually what's determined business success. It can be the thing that really makes an organization. And of course, it can be a damn squid as well. And having said that, I shall pass the ball back to Eric.
All right, and I'll hand it right over to Bill. And Bill, if you want to go to quick start there and share your screen.
Yeah, here.
The top left-hand corner.
Yeah.
Start.
Thank you for the instructions. I appreciate it. And Robin, I really liked your discussion. It was funny. I've worked on a virtual team for 18 years now, so I think I can count myself a part of the mobile workforce. Sometimes I worry that I'm going to cede. If I have an after-work function, I often have to get dressed to go to it. and then I maybe start to lose perspective on what dressed is. So anyhow, with that, let's go ahead and get started. I want to confirm that maybe Eric could just chime in and tell me, can you see my screen okay?
Excellent. Yep, looks good.
All right. So my name is Bill Ellis. I work with IDERA on the Precise product line, and we're talking about enabling mobility. And we're really talking about measuring it and, and making sure that it's working to your satisfaction. One of the big points there was that, it's something that people kind of interact with your company. It's very, in a way, it's very intimate. The phone is right in somebody's hand, and and so the impression, the speed makes a big impression on all of the users. So this was kind of a customer experience, and that's all I would share. They had a go live. It did not go well, and the initial load test did not fully reveal changes to the underlying application infrastructure. And so one of the things I like to stress is that, with mobile, whether application or HTML5, there's also a lot of technology that is dependent upon, starting with the network, into the web server, into the business logic, into messaging. And if they're making a purchase, a significant business transaction, they're interacting with the system of record. And kind of ironically, when we were getting started, we encountered a couple of network issues. So all of this stuff is very pertinent, even to delivering this webinar itself. And so, you know, you could have one application, at least 6 technologies, numerous end users, and just answering even the simplest questions is very difficult. Is an end user having a problem? What is the problem? Where in the application stack? What code is causing the problem? And so kind of getting a handle on those things is indeed non-trivial. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some measurements that we're taking at a site to help discern where problems are within the application stack. And what we're looking at here is a graph where the y-axis is response time, the x-axis is time across the day, and the stack bar graph is a measurement of where the end user transactions are spending their time. And so you kind of get like a nice trend here, and then it is going up and up and up. And it basically is the demarcation of the cutover. And so consulting the stack bar graph, you can start to see, you know, that there's a lot of problems in the J2EE tier. You're also seeing issues in the web server tier. And then there's some pretty big blips actually in the database tier as well. And so now that we have identified that there's multiple tiers with multiple problems, we need to go a little bit further in to find out exactly what's going on in order to have an intelligent response to this new usage pattern and this very slow, we're talking about 4 or 5x slower performance. And so one of the first things that we wanted to do is to say, well, is this one transaction? And so we've looked at the scope on the left-hand side of all of the transactions, and then consulting, it's really easiest to look at the response time bar graph to basically see that, you know, you're seeing that same client, web server, Java, for certain transactions more than others, database time, but it's really across the board in terms of all transactions. And this is looking at users, and so you start to get, this is a global deployment, so you're looking at, you know, the primary continents within the world. So it's all users, all locations. This is a global problem that happened, and so that starts to isolate. You know, it's not, you know, one or a particular group of users. It's something that's more happening on the data center side. And so we start to diagnose, well, where in the data set, what application tiers. And so we start to look at average response time, it building up, also layered over that with the number of executions to kind of get an idea about scaling. This is very interesting. The lower half actually kind of shows the longer term history, and you can see very high access counts. But the other side of that is the number of concurrent connections is relatively low. After we switched over to a mobile HTML5 application, the number of connections more than doubles at a much smaller, we're talking orders of magnitude, you know, it's 100 times less accesses. So we're not scaling. We've got at least double the number of connections to what we had previously. So we're starting to discern kind of what are the new demands that the mobile application is putting on the underlying infrastructure. So let's go in even further because we need to isolate where issues are occurring. And so here you're basically looking at, you know, kind of things scoping up, and, you know, we really didn't need this bar graph here to say that we were not meeting our SLAs, but we could easily see that in the upper graph, but we got kind of a secondary confirmation in terms of execution counts for SLA non-compliance. Now here, we're actually start looking at locking, and this is within, this happens to be WebLogic, but within the business logic tier. And you can see here, and this might be a little bit hard to read, but you're pushing on 31,000 lock acquisitions for an aggregated lock time of 12 hours 30 minutes. So this is clearly a huge problem. Now, the lock impact shows us that there's always some derivation of the 80-20 rule. It's really down to one method, one group of methods that's really causing the issues. Now we're starting to isolate problems within a particular tier. And so we'll go in a little bit further. Now here is the messaging system, and we start to see these this kind of the over time graph that I'm circling in the top left. You can see the response time is going up, and the pink, the key, this is actually show queuing, and there's actually a very different queuing that's happening, that's being pushed up due to the number of connections. And so the messaging system is doing a lot more work. There's a lot more, if you make an analogy to that grocery, there's a lot more carts in each lane at the checkout counter, and that's what's pushing the queuing up. And you can see that most clearly in the domains. Each of the domains is seeing very, very, very high queuing. So far I've identified locking within WebLogic. I've identified queuing within the messaging system, and this happens to be Tuxedo. And then what we're looking at here is a similar type of analysis, but we're looking at execution states within the system of record, and this happens to be execution states within Oracle. The reason why we focus on time is that time has two excellent properties. Number one, it is the way that end users and applications experience performance. Number two is it measures resource consumption, and so it will automatically identify where the bottlenecks are. And so I can see here at the database tier that I've got additional I/O time, so I'm stressing the storage subsystem. Every tier is dependent upon the downstream tiers. The database is dependent upon storage. I can also see that within the database time, I'm doing locking. So I need to get a little bit more granular before that information becomes a little bit more actionable. And so let's kind of go in, peel back the onion yet another layer. Now, this is actually a look at execution counts. The y-axis in this count is, this is in thousands, so you're looking at 9,000, 9 million, and so the execution count is also going up and up and up. So the new mobility application is stressing the application a whole bunch of ways. Locking, just to recap, locking at the web tier, queuing in the messaging system, additional execution count on the database tier, additional I/O, additional locking within the database tier. So I'm actually impacting every tier within the application stack. And so it's very important to be able to have metrics from every tier within the application stack. Here, I'm actually subdividing the database activity into programs. And I can see that I've really got two programs. The turquoise color maps to application lock. And so this one, the distribution server, has application lock. The app, this is the mobile part. This also has application lock. And you can see that a number of these are bottlenecked on storage itself. So now I'm peeling back the onion to see what I can do at every single tier. And the reason I'm doing this is a lot of people look at this from a capacity planning standpoint. And most of the cloud services, they talk about expanding servers, CPU, and memory. The other side of the coin is just as important is the application code that's executing and driving the consumption of those resources. And when you know about the application code, you can address capacity by processing efficiency. So you have both sides of the same coin, and it gives IT professionals additional options for solving the problem. It's not just add more servers. It's also what can we do to kind of clean things up and operate more efficient. The old work, smarter, not harder. So, so here we can actually, Oracle has kind of a neat thing called modules and actions, where you can actually start to document the code. And so you can also get into you know, kind of looking at things another way. Like here, the application lock that we saw, well, that came in through the expense sheet code. It also came in through the distribution server. And so those are the two primary drivers of that new locking. And the new storage is coming through the online system. And so you're starting to really kind of build a profile of what the drivers are for this additional resource consumption. It's one thing to know about the resources, it's another thing to be able to pinpoint the drivers and the underlying code. And so kind of going into this, I think we looked at this expense sheet, and so we go in here. Now, looking at the underlying objects that are being exercised, you start seeing this message log. Well, every time they do messaging, and we saw that it is going up by a multiple, we're actually touching this message log table, and you're going to actually see in just a minute that that's actually causing a lot of the locking within the database tier. So these new usage patterns are having a big impact up and down the application stack. Now, over on the right-hand side is the SQL code. And so this is actually the application code, and we are tracking what the SQL statements are doing by execution state. And so it's very easy through the color coding to see which SQL statements are involved in those locks. The reason that this is really vital is that if you go to your DBA and you say, hey, we think there's a problem at the database level, they might just look at the database and it might look pretty much the way it ran yesterday. But being able to correlate the way the application is using the database, then they can pinpoint the exact SQL statements that they should focus on, and then they can get into some of those advanced practices, looking at like execution plans and all of those things that they can tweak to make the system of record run much more quickly. And so the correlating down to the code is really vital to enable the technology experts to be able to solve and remediate underlying problems. Now here, you know, we also talked about storage. Here you can see the number of physical reads. You can kind of see when that happened. And this starts to get into the hardware architecture, because when you're planning out evolving a system, one of the things you might choose to do is you can choose different types of storage, and they have a very different expense profile. And in certain cases, it's going to make a good sense to upgrade and pay for flash storage. If I'm doing a lot more random reads, then that flash storage is really going to pay off for me. And so the overarching message of this is that with a new application, puts new demands on the system, and the underlying application stack needs to evolve to address those needs. And you also want to look at what those needs are, and can the code be tweaked to make it be more efficient. And finally, down into the CPU, you can see, like, kind of on the cutover period, we had been running at approximately 10%, and then once with the new code, we're at 4x. Now we're at 40%. And this is really important, you know, for physical as well as virtualized environments, to make sure that you have adequate server resources to fulfill the needs of the application. And so here's like just more of a close-up, so you can see some of those numbers a little bit up front. Interesting, at the server level, the memory consumption hadn't changed that much, but certainly the number of CPU cycles demanded had. And this basically just is a recap of looking at the expense report, kind of looking at the scaling, the fact that the number of executions actually kind of went down, but the execution time went up. And so that showed that, you know, under the mobility, the expense component of the application was really having a trouble. And that's definitely going to have a user effect on things, because, you know, if you can't do your job, you know, people are going to basically just stop using the mobility. And the nice thing about mobility is it really does empower the workforce productivity, and that's very good for paychecks and so forth. So you definitely want that to kind of roll. And we're looking at the same thing here, just from a location standpoint. So that's Europe and the Middle East, Asia, kind of VPN connections, and then kind of at headquarters itself, and the United States overall. So we believe that one way to get that, you know, that valuable information at every tier of the application stack is through the Precise product line. I'm going to just very quickly, Robin and Eric, I'm going to just quickly kind of just provide an overview of what Precise does and kind of why it's designed the way it's designed. And, you know, kind of what happens, the end user's trying to do something. There's a lot of technology in the data center. The end user really does not care about it. They just want to, you know, do their job. Meanwhile, you have a lot of people in IT, well-intentioned, very smart, but they aren't even aware of a problem until this end user reports, if they report. And then a lot of times, this is going to kick off a very expensive, time-consuming, ultimately frustrating process where people look at a subset of the application stack, but it's very difficult to answer those basic questions about, you know, who, what, when, where, why. And so kind of what we believe is by measuring the end user transaction, starting, in their device, through the network, into the web server, into the Java, capturing that information, we can answer the questions of who, what, when, where, why, provide recommendations, but probably the most important thing is completing the feedback loop. We all need feedback to improve. It's the only way that you know that something's going wrong. By having the history put into a centralized repository, it provides one sheet of music for everybody to read from, and so that it becomes very easy to figure out where problems are. So once again, the design is about measuring the end user transaction. This is going to identify slow transactions. Segmenting it, this is going to tell what technology is a problem, and then providing an expert view on each of the individual tiers so that you can figure out what's happening. Precise is going to provide alerting as well as reporting and dashboards for all stakeholders. You know, whether if you want to have just an overview or if you want to kind of have a deep technology view of what's going on. Now, what can happen, kind of like a day in the life, either you as an IT specialist could call an end user, or sometimes an end user could call you, log into Precise. You can focus, once again, the y-axis is response time, the x-axis is time across the day. Here we're each sub-state, so you have client time, web server time, Java, Tuxedo, database time. Down here you have the driving transactions. You can bring up a menu to identify a particular end user. In this way, IT has the ability to address that particular end user's issues. And so you can see exactly when they were busy. You can see that they were using content management. You can focus in on that transaction, and the Precise is going to give you an analysis of that transaction. The percentage at the end is added by Precise, and that tells you how much time, or the percentage of time that's spent on that individual step, down to individual SQL statements. This is the context. And one of the things that we say is that everybody has tools, but few shops have context. And context enables, the Java administrator to focus on the application code, the DBA to identify, like in this case, the particular SQL statement. And so with that information, it gives them a lot more visibility on how to address the underlying root cause for the particular transaction that was impacting the particular user. So you're really laser focused on the root cause. And you can analyze the SQL statement, where did it spend its time while executing. And, you know, just by contrast, a lot of tools like Enterprise Manager, just to pick on them, they're big, they can take it, is, you know, they kind of look at things kind of from an instance perspective. And that's not enough focus really to get into these applications. Typically, your OLTP mobility applications are going to be low latency, high throughput. So focusing on the top 10 list, you know, that's a start, but it's really not good enough for this type of application. And then the other thing is that particularly for internally hosted applications, identifying by user ID is really vital, because it's not just about the application and the infrastructure, it's also about how the end users use the application. And the end users typically have much better behavior when you're able to identify them. And so this is just kind of a screen of different transactions and kind of the client experience, and then segmented. I guess I've been speaking for a little while, a little tired out here. I'm going to kind of plow ahead. Here we're looking at a dashboard that we put together that would show alerts, and then just show different tiers of the application stack. You know, here are your web servers, and you can verify by response time, execution count, that things are load balanced. You can look at, you know, browser accesses. You can look at heap usage and garbage collections. Make sure you have that nice sawtooth pattern, that you don't have a memory leak, et cetera. And the idea of this is to provide more of a little bit of a more technical dashboard of each of the components within the application stack. So the Precise product line offered by IDERA offers production monitoring, 24/7, very detailed information. It's pretty easy to deploy this. You do not need to map transactions. Whatever the end users do, Precise automatically connects the dots across the application stack. If a downstream tier is not instrumented, Precise will recognize that and provide the in and out time and recommend that you instrument the downstream tier. And so it's very easy, kind of time to value. We are very strong on the database. This is IDERA's kind of claim to fame. And the reason it's so important is that every significant business transaction interacts with the system of record. And so the database becomes the foundation of performance. And so the other tools in the marketplace, they do an okay job, but okay isn't really good enough. You really need to know exactly what's happening with the SQL statements. And we do a lot of advanced things that are too much for this, like give a SQL statement history and track execution plans over time. And so that's an area that we can explore further if you might be interested. So with that, that's the Precise Application Performance Platform. We invite you to request an additional meeting through the IDERA.com website if you have additional interest in the solution and the topics that we discussed today. And Eric, with that, I think we're still under the wire. I'm going to pass the baton back to you and Robin. Thank you.
No, that's fantastic, and I love the content that you put together here, because you do a fantastic job of displaying how complex the environment is underneath the hood. And of course, the whole job of Precise, or the purpose of Precise, is to help navigate that complexity and understand what's actually happening, and then be able to take some actions to improve something. And I'm just kind of bewildered at how complex it is. I'm guessing that Precise also allows you to identify certain patterns of behavior and then name them, or at least record them or bookmark them, or some sense like that. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that's going to happen is you don't want to go chasing your tail. You know, you don't want to just go spend a lot of time on a one-off. So you're going to want to look at what are the patterns, what are the trends, because there's a lot of technology to manage. And so one of the things is to prioritize and be able to rank, know where to spend your time, know what needs to be honed. And you also want to take kind of a conservative approach of lower risk and lower cost. You don't want to necessarily make an expensive global change without having assessing or having a very good sense of, knowing that it will indeed help the issue. So kind of knowing what's happening over time and those trending is vital to intelligently addressing kind of the underlying issues.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. That makes complete sense. And how big a deal is virtualization for being able to see what's happening? And then are you coming into organizations that are using containers, using Docker, for example, and how would that impact what Precise is able to do?
Yeah, so kind of the word container can mean different things according to different vendors. And so we work with VM. Almost everybody uses VMware. I consider it kind of like the de facto standard at this point. I know that there's competitors out there, and we are kind of expanding kind of what we support. But VMware is the dominant. Within the Oracle stack, there's containerized databases. And so all of that is very important to be able to evolve your system very quickly. It's also really important to know in a virtualized environment when the physical host is not able to meet the needs of all of the guest containers, because each of them are competing for resources. And one of the things that actually happened internally that I was kind of surprised at is that we had actually within IDERA so many idle VMs, but each of those idle VMs consumes resources that they started to cause an issue overall for the VMs that were actually being used that were important to us conducting our business. And so that was kind of a interesting thing. Now, we don't support every technology under the sun. There is a support matrix associated with this solution. And so that's one of the things that we would want to drill down on for a particular prospect or a particular customer, is to make sure that we can meet the technology needs and the individual technologies that their application stack is running under.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. From your experience, what are some of the major forces now that are driving challenges on mobile? When you and I talked before this webcast a couple of months ago, you made a really good point about how just the functionality and the layout of an iPhone or some mobile device can be a real challenge for the business, because suddenly the end user can't figure out how to get some specific process in the workflow done, right? And so to that point, what you're enabling in mobile app development is you're showing the developers where the problems occur, and then you can map that back to what the app is doing on this particular device or that particular device. And that's very useful, right, for the developer, because now they can see what is causing the problem. They can make some change to the app to solve that, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of the overlaying of incredibly high expectations. I mean, everybody expects everything to, in a sense, just work. But there's so much variety out there. You have all of these different smartphones. They have different screen dimensions, and then you have different vendors of communication. The Verizons, the AT&Ts, the Sprints. Those are just the popular ones kind of in the United States. And there's just so much variety out there. It's like, well, how do you kind of wrap your arms around all of this to kind of start to discern, kind of where the issues are? And so kind of, there's a lot of metrics that are available, and one of the things that our product management team has done is attempt to pull in the metrics that are most important or most needed by the IT team to be able to make intelligent decisions. And so it's kind of a challenge. And we do, our product is, like the marketplace evolving. And so we get feedback from our customers, and there's always enhancement requests on, hey, this additional metric would be super helpful to us. So our product is evolving just like the marketplace. But if I had to say, actually, Eric, what was really interesting to me is that whole expectations thing is, people are like, it used to be, back in the day, people would wait, 5, 7 seconds for, a screen to paint up. Now it's like 1 or 2 seconds. People are like, oh, this application doesn't work at all.
That's funny.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's a bit unrealistic, honestly, and I think that, maybe we'll start seeing a bit more realism around that topic. But nonetheless, it is a fact of life that people have very, very high expectations. And I guess, Robin, I'll bring you back in real quick in our last couple of minutes here. I loved your assessment of website as a catalog and app as a loyalty machine. And to that point, what we've been talking about here is how to enable the developers of these apps to understand what's happening. Is it usable? Is it not usable? And what can you change to adjust that? And to Bill's point here just a second ago, the cycle time on fixing that problem has really shortened, right? It's just not like it used to be. You got to fix that quick, or you're just going to have a huge drop-off in use, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's there are a whole bunch of other things that have played into this. So you've got this agile development, and you've got expectations in a lot of places now that you're going to release a new version of something that's in the process of being developed or in process of being changed every couple of weeks. And that puts, it makes, when you kind of think about it, if you think about the deployment environments and you think about how big the stack is when you're getting into mobile, you've actually got multiple potential devices on the end node, and then you're going to have middleware in the middle, and you may well have SOA underneath, and underneath the SOA you may well have databases, So you may be touching many, many applications, you may be touching multiple databases, and you may be doing various complex things in terms of security, and it's all got to work, and the expectation is it's going to work reasonably well. And the amazing thing is sometimes it does, But my kind of thought about this is if you really, if you're building mobile apps that are really key to the success of the company, and a lot of them turn out, a lot of these things really are. If you're doing like mobile maintenance and oil rigs and oil pipelines and things like that, it's kind of got to work, The consequences of it not working are just kind of dire. And if you don't have this ability to actually slice up the application and know where things are going wrong, because mostly it is performance. We've got really good test harnesses nowadays. So yes, there are bugs and bugs do get through, but mostly if something's going wrong, it's a performance issue, And if you can't put, the stethoscope in 18 different places, then it's really difficult to pin down what's going wrong. And, you also have, the network's a factor in this, and you also have the reality that, any given component in an application can be stressed at different times of day because of the nature of that particular application. You've got to have success. You've got to have sophisticated. You've got to have sophisticated monitoring tools if you're going to stand a chance with all of that.
Yes, I would have to agree, and I think that's really the strength of Precise by IDERA these days. And Bill, I guess just any closing comments from you. I think that this technology is fantastic. I also realize that as a user of this technology, you really need to understand the complexity of information systems and the dependencies and be able to figure out where, when, and how you synthesize all this information to assess what's actually happening. and that requires an intelligent and trained human being. And frankly, it's one reason why, I'm not at all concerned about machine learning taking away jobs. I think machine learning can be very useful underneath a technology like this to identify common patterns and then make suggestions to the end user as to what might be happening here. But, what are some closing thoughts from you about really getting the enterprise to understand the importance of having this kind of troubleshooting capability, and what should they know about that besides what you said already?
Yeah, so Eric, I would agree with you. There's a tremendous amount of complexity. I believe that the precise product line, by focusing on the metric time, that a user who can read a stack bar graph can use precise successfully. And I just want to say thank you to the participants and to you and Robin for hosting today's webinar.
Hey, you bet. And like I said, we will host this archive for some time now, so feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. We do archive all these webcasts. I sent a link to the slides a few minutes ago. Feel free to check that out. But great job again, Bill, today. You really know your stuff. It's always fun to work with a professional like yourself. And I think this is really going to be the enabling technology for the mobile workforce. So thanks for your time, folks. We'll catch up to you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.